February 1970. Pomona, California. 90,000 fans packed into the stands for something drag racing had never seen before, the very first official pro stock race in NHRA history. The favorites? Sox and Martin, the legendary Mopar duo with their Hemi-powered Plymouth Barracuda. They qualified number 1 with a blistering 10.00 at 139 miles per hour. But there was another car in the field. A plain white Camaro. Unassuming, quiet, driven by a man they called Grumpy. No one knew what Bill Jenkins was hiding under that hood. And more importantly, no one knew the dark secret hiding in the metal of that car itself. What happened next would change pro stock racing forever. And just 15 days later, that same Camaro would be banned from ever competing again. This is the story NHRA didn't want to talk about. The story of an acid-dipped race car that won the first 2 pro stock races ever held, and then mysteriously disappeared from the sport. Today, you're going to learn the truth about Grumpy's Toy 4. The real reason it was forced into retirement. And the engineering secret that was so dangerous, Chevrolet themselves said it should never have been raced. Stay with me because what you're about to hear will shock you. December 29, 1966. A brand new Camaro Z/28 rolled off the Chevrolet production line in Norwood, Ohio. VIN stamped. Factory fresh. One of the very first Z/28s ever built. We're talking the dawn of the pony car wars here. This wasn't just any Camaro. This was part of Chevrolet's answer to the Ford Mustang's dominance. The Z/28 package was designed by Vince Piggins, Chevrolet's performance products manager, specifically to homologate the Camaro for SCCA Trans Am racing. It came with a special 302 cubic inch small block created by mating a 327 block with a 283 crankshaft. High revving, lightweight, purpose-built. But this particular car wasn't destined for a showroom floor or a customer's driveway. Within the first week of January 1967, it was shipped directly to Roger Penske Racing in Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. Roger Penske. Yes, that Roger Penske, the man who would go on to become one of the most successful team owners in motorsports history. In 1967, he was already making waves in SCCA road racing with his Sunoco-sponsored Camaros. And he had big plans for this particular Z/28. Penske's goal was simple: dominate Trans Am racing. But there was a problem. The competition was fierce. Ford had the Mustang. Dodge had the Challenger. Plymouth had the Barracuda. Everyone was pushing the envelope, looking for every possible advantage. And in 1967 road racing, that meant one thing above all else: weight reduction. Serious, aggressive, no compromises weight reduction. See, physics doesn't lie. A lighter car accelerates faster, brakes better, and handles more precisely through corners. But production cars come from the factory with thick steel body panels designed for safety and longevity. That's great for daily drivers. Terrible for race cars. So Penske's team made a bold decision. They would use a process called chemical milling, more commonly known as acid dipping. Now, let me explain what this actually means because it sounds almost too crazy to be true. Acid dipping involves submerging the entire car body, every panel, every surface, into a massive industrial chemical bath. The acid literally eats away at the metal, dissolving material from both sides simultaneously. It makes the steel thinner, lighter, more fragile. This wasn't some backyard operation. This was industrial-grade material removal. The same process aircraft manufacturers used to lighten airplane components. But before they could acid dip the body, Penske's crew had to prepare it. They installed a full roll cage, a welded steel safety structure, inside the car. They also cut out the trunk floor to make room for a racing fuel cell. The roll cage was critical because once you acid dip a body, you compromise its structural integrity. Without that cage, the car would literally fold in half. The Camaro was then sent out to be chemically milled. When it came back to Penske's shop a few weeks later, the crew gathered around to inspect their handiwork. And that's when reality hit them like a hammer. The metal was paper thin. Not figuratively. Actually paper thin. In some places, the body panels were so thin you could see light through them. 2 grown men could lift the entire empty body shell with their bare hands, something that should be impossible with a steel-bodied car. Word quickly spread. Chevrolet sent their own engineers from Detroit to examine the car. These were GM's top technical people, the guys who understood metallurgy and structural dynamics. Their verdict was swift and brutal: this car will not survive road racing. Think about what happens in a road course race. You're pulling lateral G-forces through every corner. The chassis is twisting, flexing, experiencing loads from multiple directions simultaneously. Even with a roll cage, the acid-dipped body would tear itself apart. Stress cracks would appear. Panels would buckle. In their professional opinion, this Camaro would break apart on the first hard corner at speed. It was too dangerous. Too compromised. A brilliant idea in theory, but a complete failure in execution. The Camaro was rolled into a dark corner of Penske's Pennsylvania shop. Rejected. Abandoned. A $5,000 mistake gathering dust while other race cars thundered around racetracks across America. But here's where it gets interesting. Because in early 1967, word reached the ears of a man in Malvern, Pennsylvania. A mechanical engineer who'd dropped out of Cornell University. A man obsessed with one thing: winning drag races. His name was Bill Jenkins. And when he heard about that acid-dipped Camaro rotting in Penske's shop, his mind started racing. Because Jenkins knew something Penske didn't. Something that would change everything. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because early in 1967, word reached the ears of a man working in a small shop in Malvern, Pennsylvania, about 15 miles west of Philadelphia. His name was William Tyler Jenkins. Friends called him Bill. Competitors called him Grumpy, a nickname he'd earned not because he was angry, but because he was intensely focused. Serious. No nonsense. When Jenkins was working on an engine or tuning a race car, he didn't want to be bothered with small talk or distractions. Jenkins was 36 years old in 1967. He'd spent 3 years at Cornell University studying mechanical engineering before dropping out, not because he was failing, but because he realized he could learn more in a race shop than in a classroom. He'd been building engines since he was a teenager, working on tractor motors on farms in Pennsylvania. By 1967, Jenkins had already made a name for himself. He'd been the engine builder and tuner for Dave Strickler, one of the most successful stock and super stock racers of the early 1960s. Together, they'd won the 1963 Little Eliminator Nationals. But Jenkins wanted more. He wanted to race his own cars, prove his own theories, test his own engineering concepts. And in 1966, he'd done exactly that with something called Grumpy's Toy, a humble Chevrolet 2 Nova with a 327 cubic inch engine that somehow outran the mighty 426 Hemi Dodges and Plymouths. The car made Jenkins a legend. It proved that brains could beat brawn. That power-to-weight ratio mattered more than raw horsepower. So when Jenkins heard through the racing grapevine that Penske had an acid-dipped Camaro sitting and used in his shop, a car that was too light and too dangerous, his engineering mind started racing. Because Jenkins understood something fundamental about physics that Penske's road racing team had missed. What's dangerous for road racing could be absolutely perfect for drag racing. Think about it. Road courses require cars to turn left and right constantly, to brake hard entering corners, to accelerate while the chassis is loaded laterally. The body needs to be strong because forces are coming from every direction. But drag racing? It's completely different. 1,220 feet in a perfectly straight line. No turning, no braking, just pure acceleration from a standing start. The forces are entirely longitudinal, front to back. A dragster doesn't need the structural rigidity of a road racer. It needs to be light. Every pound of unnecessary weight is wasted energy. Jenkins saw opportunity where everyone else saw failure. That paper-thin metal? That wasn't a design flaw. That was a competitive advantage waiting to be exploited. So Bill Jenkins contacted Roger Penske and made him an offer. The exact price isn't recorded, but considering the car was worthless to Penske for its intended purpose, Jenkins probably got it for a fraction of what it cost new. In February 1967, that acid-dipped Camaro was loaded onto a trailer and hauled to Jenkins' shop in Malvern. But Jenkins wasn't finished. Because he had another problem to solve. See, this was a 1967 Camaro. The VIN tag in the door jamb proved it. Build date December 29, 1966. And Jenkins had big plans that would take him well into the future. He knew NHRA rules evolved constantly. He knew that eventually, there might be restrictions on how old a car could be to remain competitive. So Jenkins did something borderline genius. He converted it. He removed the 1967-style vent windows from the doors. Installed 1968 Camaro door glass, which was a different shape, without vents. Added 1968 door trim pieces. Installed hidden headlights, which were a 1968 feature not available in 1967. He even went so far as to glue fake side marker light trim and lenses onto the quarter panels, then cut actual holes in the front fenders to mount real 1968 style side marker lights. When Jenkins was done, the 1967 Camaro looked absolutely identical to a 1968 model from the outside. Unless you knew where to look, unless you opened that door and found the VIN tag, you would never know this car predated the 1968 model year. The car still had its original 1967 VIN stamped in the door jamb. But to tech inspectors at the drag strip, to competitors in the staging lanes, to fans in the stands, it appeared to be a perfectly legal 1968 Camaro. Jenkins painted it plain Wimbledon white. No fancy graphics. No wild colors. Just white paint, black accent stripes, and the words, "Grumpy's Toy," lettered in gold on the doors. Simple. Understated. Professional. Under that hood, Jenkins installed a 396 cubic inch big block Chevrolet, the L78 version rated at 375 horsepower from the factory. But of course, Jenkins being Jenkins, that engine made considerably more power than any factory rating suggested. From 1967 through 1969, Bill Jenkins campaigned that acid-dipped Camaro in NHRA's super stock classes. And he won. A lot. In 1967, at the biggest race of the year, the NHRA Nationals in Indianapolis, Jenkins won super stock eliminator. A career-defining victory. Proof that his engineering approach was working. The car became a match racing legend. While factory-backed teams were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, Jenkins was beating them with a reject from Penske's corner. A car that wasn't supposed to race at all. And through it all, Jenkins kept his mouth shut about the car's true origins. He didn't brag. He didn't explain. He just won. But Jenkins was about to face his biggest test yet. Because NHRA was about to create something new. Something that would change drag racing forever. And that acid-dipped Camaro was about to make history. Now, let me paint you a picture of who Bill Jenkins was. This wasn't some rich factory driver with unlimited budgets. This was a blue-collar mechanic from Pennsylvania. A guy who'd worked on tractor engines as a kid. Who dropped out of college to chase a dream. Jenkins had already made his name in 1966 with his Chevy 2, a tiny car with a 327 cubic inch engine that somehow outran the mighty 426 Hemi Dodges and Plymouths. People thought he was crazy. But he won. And won. And won. He did it through pure engineering brilliance. Power-to-weight ratios. Physics. Mathematics. While other guys were bragging about horsepower, Jenkins was calculating mass and acceleration curves. And now, with this acid-dipped Camaro, he had a weapon no one else possessed. From 1967 through 1969, Jenkins campaigned that Camaro in super stock. He won the 1967 NHRA Nationals. Beat the factory-backed teams. All while keeping his mouth shut about the car's true origins. And then came 1970. The year everything changed. January 1970. NHRA dropped a bombshell announcement that would reshape professional drag racing. They were creating a brand new class called Pro Stock. Factory hot rods. American muscle cars with big engines, running heads up with no handicaps. No breakout times. No staggered starts based on dial-ins. Just pure raw speed. Quickest car wins. This was revolutionary. Up until 1970, stock and super stock racing used a complex handicap system. Slower cars got head starts. You could actually lose a race by going too fast and breaking out of your class index. It was like a golf handicap system, designed to level the playing field but complicated and sometimes frustrating. Pro Stock changed everything. It was bracket racing for professionals. Run what you brung. No excuses. The fastest car wins. Period. The rules were relatively straightforward. American-made cars only. Production-based body styles. Engines had to match the manufacturer. Chevy engines in Chevys, Ford engines in Fords, Mopar engines in Mopars. Some body modifications were allowed for tire clearance and aerodynamics. But the cars had to look basically stock. No wild tube-frame rail dragsters with fiberglass bodies. And here's the critical rule, the one that would ultimately seal the Camaro's fate. NHRA implemented what they called a 2-year stale date rule. Only cars from model year 1968 or newer could compete in 1970. Bill Jenkins read those rules very carefully. He looked at his 1968 Camaro sitting in his Malvern shop. And he smiled that quiet, knowing smile that drove his competitors crazy. The first official pro stock race would be held at the 1970 NHRA Winter Nationals in Pomona, California. February 1, 1970. And every big name in drag racing signed up. Ronnie Sox and Buddy Martin, The legendary Mopar duo showed up with their brand new 1970 Plymouth Barracuda powered by a 426 Hemi. They were the favorites. Sox was arguably the best driver in the country. The Hemi was the most feared engine in drag racing. They had full factory backing from Chrysler Corporation. Dick Landy brought his Dodge Challenger. Dyno Don Nicholson rolled in with a Ford Maverick powered by a single overhead cam 427. Wally Booth had an L88 powered Camaro. These were the heavyweights, the factory-backed teams with unlimited budgets and engineering support. And then there was Bill Jenkins. No factory support. No corporate sponsorship. Just a white Camaro, a small crew, and an engine that Jenkins had built himself in his Pennsylvania shop. The days leading up to the race, Jenkins and his crew, Dave Strickler and Dick Whitman, worked around the clock. They pulled an all-nighter before qualifying, yanking the engine completely out of the car for the second time that week. Every component was inspected. Every clearance was checked. Jenkins was chasing hundredths of a second, and he knew those hundredths would add up. Under that plain white hood sat something special. An aluminum ZL1 big block Chevrolet engine. This was essentially a Can-Am racing motor, the same basic architecture that powered Chaparral and McLaren sports racing cars. Somewhere around 430 cubic inches of displacement, though the exact spec was something Jenkins kept to himself. Tunnel ram intake manifold. Dual Holley carburetors. Aluminum heads. This thing made serious power. But here's what made it truly special. The whole package weighed less than a cast iron big block. Aluminum block. Aluminum heads. Every gram of weight savings carefully calculated. And underneath? That acid-dipped body. Metal so thin it flexed when you pressed on it. Weight that should have been impossible for a full-bodied car. February 1st, qualifying day. Pomona Raceway. 90,000 fans packed the grandstands, a record crowd. Ronnie Sox and the Sox and Martin Barracuda rolled up to the starting line. The Hemi barked to life. Sox staged the car, focused and confident. The tree dropped. The Hemi launched hard, clawing its way down the quarter mile. Final numbers, 10.00 seconds flat at 139 miles per hour. 10 seconds even. The crowd went wild. That was the number everyone had been chasing. Breaking into the nines, running quicker than 10.00 seconds, was the holy grail of pro stock. Nobody had done it yet. Sox had just laid down the gauntlet. He qualified number 1. The Mopar guys were celebrating. They thought they had it locked. Then came Bill Jenkins. The white Camaro pulled into the staging lanes. No fanfare. No drama. Jenkins sat behind the wheel in his simple driving suit, no fancy graphics or sponsor patches. Just a guy in his car. He rolled through the water box, heating the rear tires. Staged the car. Both amber lights glowing. The crowd leaned forward. The tree flashed green. Jenkins nailed the launch. The Camaro hooked hard and drove straight as an arrow down the strip. The aluminum big block screaming through the tunnel ram. The acid-dipped body barely visible as it rocketed toward the finish line. And when the scoreboards lit up, the numbers told a story. 10.08 seconds at 139.31 miles per hour. Close. Qualified second. But not quite fast enough to take the pole from Sox. But that was okay. Because Jenkins wasn't worried about qualifying. He was worried about race day. February 5th, eliminations. The real show. First round. Jenkins versus Bill Heelscher in a Dodge Dart. The tree drops. Jenkins launches perfectly, something he'd been practicing for years with his 4-speed manual transmission. While other racers were missing shifts and fumbling with clutches, Jenkins rode through the gears like a machine. Smooth. Precise. Fast. The Camaro crossed the finish line. The scoreboards lit up. 9.98 seconds at 138.46 miles per hour. 9.98. The first pro stock car to break into the 9-second zone. Ever. In history. The crowd absolutely lost their minds. 90,000 people on their feet, screaming. Because they just witnessed something nobody thought would happen on day 1 of a brand new class. Jenkins had just broken the 10-second barrier. In the first round. Of the first race. In pro stock history. He marched through the next rounds methodically. In the semifinals he faced Dick Landy's Dodge Challenger. Landy red-lighted, left too soon, and was automatically disqualified. Jenkins advanced to the final without even having to race. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The final round. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins in his white Chevrolet Camaro versus Ronnie Sox in the Sox and Martin Plymouth Barracuda. Chevy versus Mopar. Small budget independent versus factory-backed team. The underdog versus the favorite. 90,000 fans in the grandstands. Millions more would read about this in Hot Rod magazine and drag racing newspapers. This was the race that would define Pro Stock's future. Both cars pulled to the starting line. Jenkins in the left lane. Sox in the right. Both drivers focused. Both cars sitting on the two-stage beams, waiting for the tree. The starter hit the button. Amber lights flickered down. Then green. Both cars launched within hundredths of a second of each other. Jenkins' reaction time was 0.578. Sox was right there at 0.571. Essentially dead even off the line. But then Jenkins' Camaro started pulling ahead. The lightweight acid-dipped body, the powerful aluminum engine, the perfect weight distribution, it all came together. The Camaro crossed the finish line first. The boards flashed. Jenkins, 9.996 at 139.53 miles per hour. Sox, 10.12 at 138.46 miles per hour. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins had won the very first Pro Stock race in NHRA history. Beat the factory Mopar team. Set the first 9-second Pro Stock pass. And took home the winner's trophy. The prize money? $800. Barely enough to cover the cost of tires and fuel for the weekend. But the glory? Priceless. The vindication? Immeasurable. The proof that engineering intelligence could beat corporate money? That was worth everything. But Jenkins wasn't done. Not even close. But Jenkins wasn't satisfied. 2 weeks later, the NHRA Tour moved to Gainesville, Florida. The Gator Nationals. And Jenkins won again. Back-to-back. The first 2 Pro Stock races ever held, both won by that white Camaro. 15 days. 2 wins. $30,000 in combined prize money. Plus whatever Jenkins made in match racing between events. The Camaro was unbeatable. Jenkins was on top of the world. And then NHRA dropped the hammer. After Gainesville, NHRA officials approached Jenkins. They'd been reviewing his car's paperwork, looking at VIN numbers, checking build dates, and they had questions. Their official statement was simple: the car is too old. Wait, too old? The car looked like a 1968. It had 1968 trim, 1968 glass, 1968 badging. What were they talking about? But NHRA wasn't stupid. Tech inspectors had found the VIN tag, and that VIN tag told a very different story. It showed a build date of December 29, 1966, which meant this was actually a 1967 model. Under the 2-year stale date rule, 1967 cars were not eligible for 1970 Pro Stock competition, only 1968 and newer. NHRA's decision was final. The Camaro was forced into immediate retirement. Jenkins could not race it again in Pro Stock. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because NHRA's public reason was the age of the car. But there were whispers in the pits. Rumors. Speculation. People who knew the car's history started talking. The acid dipping. The paper-thin metal. The fact that it was so light, it had a massive weight advantage over every other car in the field. See, NHRA had minimum weight rules based on engine displacement. But those rules assumed normal production body panels. Standard gauge steel. Jenkins' Camaro looked legal on the scales. But it achieved that weight with a much lighter body, which meant he could add more weight exactly where he wanted it. Better weight distribution. Better traction. Some insiders believe NHRA discovered the truth about the acid dipping. And they realized they had a problem. If they allowed this car to continue competing, every team in America would start acid dipping their bodies. And someone was going to get killed when a car came apart at 140 miles per hour. So they used the VIN tag as the official reason. Too old. Simple. No scandal. No admission that they'd let an illegal car compete in the 2 biggest races of the new Pro Stock era. Imagine Jenkins in that moment. He'd just made history, won the first 2 Pro Stock races, set the first 9-second pass, beaten the factory teams. And now NHRA was telling him his car was illegal after they'd already let him race it. But Jenkins didn't complain or sue. Because he knew. He knew it was a 1967. He knew about the acid dipping. He was pushing boundaries. But he'd already proven his point: engineering intelligence could beat corporate money. So he went back to his Malvern shop and started building a legal 1971 half Camaro that would later grace the cover of Hot Rod magazine. What Jenkins did with that Camaro changed Pro Stock forever. In 1972, he returned with a revolutionary Chevrolet Vega featuring a 331 cubic inch small block and Pro Stock's first tube frame chassis. He won 6 of 8 races and earned $250,000, tying Wilt Chamberlain as one of America's highest-paid athletes. That tube frame innovation came directly from the acid-dipped Camaro experience. Jenkins learned body structure mattered less than weight distribution and rigidity. By 1974, every competitive pro stock car used tube chassis. The stock part became cosmetic, all traced back to Penske's rejected Camaro. The forced retirement also set precedent. NHRA rewrote their rulebook with better tech inspection and clearer body modification rules. What happened to that legendary Camaro? For decades, it was lost, sold, repainted, modified, even damaged in a fire. But in 2015, Dale Carpenter and Vicky Bala from Pittsburgh found an online ad. Grumpy Jenkins built 1967 Camaro, best offer. Vicky asked, "Who's Grumpy Jenkins?" Dale nearly fell out of his chair. They bought it immediately. When they picked it up in upstate New York, the paint was stripped to bare metal so thin that 2 people could carry the entire body shell like aluminum foil. They traced the VIN, confirmed the December 1966 build date, and contacted Dick Williams, executor of Jenkins' estate. It was real, Grumpy's Toy 4, the most important pro stock car in history. After years of restoration using original parts and consulting with Jenkins' former crew, that Camaro lives again, attending shows and NHRA events as a rolling piece of drag racing history. Was Bill Jenkins a cheater? He bought a legally built car, converted it with legal production parts, and passed NHRA tech inspection. He knew it was a 1967 and knew about the acid dipping, but no rule specifically banned either in 1970. Jenkins operated in the gray area and found a loophole. That's not cheating, that's racing innovation. Jenkins died in 2012 at 81. Inducted into every major motorsports Hall of Fame. His legacy? The tube-frame pro stock car and that acid-dipped Camaro that won the first 2 pro stock races. This is the story of brilliance and pushing boundaries. In racing, rules are just the starting point. Real champions find every legal advantage. And Bill, Grumpy, Jenkins found them all. Hit that like button, subscribe for more untold drag racing stories, and comment, should Jenkins' Camaro have been banned? Thanks for watching.